Hi everyone, for today's book review we're going to be looking at the Lake Illawarra disaster and the book that covers this, which is By Derwent Divided, written by Tom Lewis. On the 5th of January 1975, the bulk carrier Lake Illawarra was sailing up the Derwent River in the Tasmanian city of Hobart, and for a variety of reasons it missed the shipping channel and ended up colliding with one of the pylons of the Tasman Bridge. The impact was so great that the pylon cracked and fell onto the ship, sinking it along with 7 crew members, while 5 motorists who were on the bridge also lost their lives. This was an epic and dramatic disaster, and the book that we're looking at covers in brief the history of the bridge, the history of the disaster itself, and also what happened immediately afterwards, because the city of Hobart found itself without an artery. The Tasman Bridge that had been built in 1965 at the cost of $15 million was the main thoroughfare for pretty much all the citizens who wanted to get from their homes to their businesses and healthcare and education facilities on the other side of the city. In a flash, their access was gone. You would have to drive a full 90 minutes all the way around the city to get to where you needed to be. And so, while efforts were underway to stabilize the bridge, stabilize the wreck, figure out how to rebuild it, the government was faced with the problem of the day-to-day. These are ordinary people who have to get to work on the other side of the city. And without any other ways to do it, they had to bring in a motley fleet of ferries and vessels in order to keep the flow of people moving from one end of the city to the other. And the bulk of this book covers that frantic fleet of vessels that were brought together so that they can keep the city going. And it was an extremely varied fleet. You had old Sydney ferries, some antiques from 1912, including the Lady Ferguson and the Kosciuszko. The Lady Ferguson was just so worn out and its wooden hull was so rotten, it barely survived the tow to Hobart, and by the time it even got to Hobart, it was declared unfit for service and basically sold essentially for firewood. In contrast, its fleetmate, the Kosciuszko, that's the Polish pronunciation. It is named after the Polish explorer and Australia's highest peak. Australians may be more familiar with their pronunciation, which is Kosciuszko. That ferry did sterling service and operated pretty much effectively for the next 2 years until the repairs to the bridge were made. In addition to this antique ferry, you had other vessels coming in. There was another Sydney ferry, the Lady Wakehurst, that also did sterling service. You even had a cattle barge that was brought in order to move people from one end of the city to the other. A couple of car carriers were also brought in so that car traffic could also move across. And this is all covered in the book. And as you can see up here, the book, it's not that big. It is covered with plenty of photos and text. The text moves along very quickly, and you get an overall sense of the disaster and the vessels that played a part in trying to keep the city of Hobart functioning during this crazy time. The Tasman Bridge ultimately was repaired. It was decided to leave the wreck of the Lake Illawarra where it is, and it's still there to this day. But in addition to the repairs, they had to figure out a way of building a new span without the pylon, and as well expanding the number of lanes on the bridge. And that all amounted to a new cost of $45 million, and the bridge was ultimately opened at the end of 1977, so 2 years after the disaster happened. If a silver lining could be found from this disaster, it came in the form of Incat. They were a small, independent shipbuilder that produced high-speed catamarans. In those 2 years, from when the bridge was destroyed to when it was repaired, there was an explosion of orders for their vessels. And that surge of activity essentially set them up for success. And Incat is now a globally recognized leader in building high-speed, super efficient catamarans, and has produced large high-speed ferries for customers all around the world. And they're still in business to this day. This book was published on the 25th anniversary of the disaster, and crazy enough, it has now been another 25 years since this book was published. And the time would be ripe for an expanded edition. The book ends with a question of what happened to all the various ferries that were involved. Some of the smaller ones are still sprinkled around. The little ferry Bundina is still afloat and in business and does sightseeing cruises on Sydney Harbour. Others, though, have since been scrapped or lost. This book will appeal to those who are interested in Australian maritime history, who are interested in shipping disasters in general. You will find that this book is a very easy read, quick read, and profusely illustrated. And I sincerely hope that there is room for a much more expanded edition, particularly as this year is also the 50th anniversary of this disaster. So, for those who wish to learn more, I could not recommend this book highly enough. It is a Four Captains' Hats. Please check out By Derwent Divided by Tom Lewis.